St. John, whose feast already we move in the church abroad from the day till the nearest Saturday. And the important thing for us, as some of us have already reflected on, you've reflected on, is that as we celebrate the saints of Russia and this idea of Holy Russia, that in St. John we encounter Holy Russia that's been brought right down into the times, more or less, in which we live. That holiness that was encountered by a saint who died either within the lifetime of many of our parishioners, or just before the beginning of the lives of many others. Truly a saint for our time, and somebody who's quite incredible, because if we think that when St. John was born, he was born in the Russian Empire, in the Kharkov region, and this man in his life crossed so many thresholds, which links the Russia of the imperial period, that great silver age, that great spiritual silver age, which had seen the flowering of Optina and St. Theophan the Recluse, St. John of Kronstadt, and he brings us through that period of the persecution, that period of martyrdom, from Holy Russia to the modern Western European world, and of course ultimately to the United States of America. And St. John is somebody who for us really is that line that joins the dots in the dot to dot, and he joins so many points together. Here, Britain, as part of the Western European Diocese of the Russian Church in exile, now the Russian Church abroad, of course was his diocese. It's what must be wonderful for Vladika Irene to be able to say, as hierarch, I am the successor of St. John. This is the most amazing thing. And we know that the holiness of Russia, of Holy Russia, was brought here, was planted here. The fact that, the railway workers in Paris would hold the train at the Gare du Nord. They would hold the train because the Monseigneur had not yet arrived. And when he got off at the other end, that the Irish workers in Victoria Station, the railway workers, would recognize great holiness in this man and would say, that is a true bishop. We're meant to have bishops, but no, that is a true bishop. Why? Because that is true holiness. As you may remember, St. John, in the earlier part of his life, was in the seminary in Bitol, in what was then the kingdom of the Serbs, Croats and Slovenes. And whilst he was an instructor in that seminary, already showing his great skills in communicating with people and communicating holiness, that people used to say, if you wish to see a saint, go to the seminary in Bitol and look for Father John, and you will find a saint. Already that holiness, the holiness of all of the long line of Russian saints, was to be seen. Tomorrow, when we stand in front of the icon and we look, we'll see so many categories of saints. And of course, we do like to put people in boxes. We do like to categorize them. And in our Troparia, we talk of prophets, martyrs, hierarchs, monastics, righteous ones. And if we look in the general Meneon, we see those sections where you put the name in, for a monk saint, for a monk martyr, for a hierarch, for plural hierarchs, for a holy fool. And we like to categorize this holiness. And then on this weekend in which we celebrate all the saints who have shone forth in the Russian lands, we celebrate somebody who combines in quite an amazing way so many of those different callings to holiness. Somebody who was an apostle. He was an apostle to the West. He came to the West, of course, as did our church, after Tito was victorious and, the Red Plague spread into what became Yugoslavia. St. John then came to the West. And look what he did for us. Not only did this representative of Holy Russia bring the holiness that we associate with our Russian church, but whilst he was in France, he labored to say to people, let's rediscover the holiness of the men and women who lived and labored here in holiness, the likes of St. Martin and St. Gregory of Tours, of St. Vincent of Lerins, of St. Genevieve. And he sought to say to people, this holiness is something which is the calling of all people. It's not a Russian thing. It's not an ethnic thing. Holiness is the calling of all men and women to God. And if we look here, if we look around us, we see in the landscape, we see in the ancient churches, in the abbeys, in the Catholic cathedrals, we see all of the signs of holiness. And we bow down and we venerate that holiness as something which we should follow. A saint who was telling us to follow in the way of the saints. This was apostolic labour. This was apostolic zeal. When St. John served in London, we have those lovely photographs of him when he was in London. One of them that I like very much shows him with the Abbess Elizabeth on the steps of the convent in Willesden. We see him there as an apostle. He went to America, sadly leaving behind his French and European flock, as an apostle. And even now, as a saint, now in the kingdom of God, he still works this apostolic labour in which it brings people to Christ. And how does it bring people to Christ? Because we experience his holiness in our lives. And through him, we are brought to experience and understand the holiness of people that we will see in the icon, who lived a long, long time ago, who seemed distant from us, who seemed culturally removed from us, who lived in a very different world from us, with very different ways, some ways which were ugly and very strange to us. This path stretches backwards all the way beyond St. Vladimir. Let's remember the story doesn't start there. If we go to ancient Kiev, it starts with Askold and Dir even before the baptism. But here we encounter Holy Russia encapsulated in one person who is an apostle, but who also is a hierarch, who is a great ascetic, podvizhnik, who in many ways was also a prophet, a prophetic voice calling in the wilderness. So many sorts of holiness all rolled up in one person. So we might think that he is in some ways a microcosm or focusing of the holiness which we will celebrate this weekend. And we've started. Yes, we've pulled the canon a little bit out of its setting by honouring him with the canon to the Mother of God at this compline service. But it's very important that we do it. And I always encourage everybody, take the saints seriously. Even in the last few weeks within this parish, there's been at least one most unlikely miracle through the intercession of St. John. In my own life, I always say that nothing is impossible for God. We know that, but it's nothing impossible for God because he will use the saints to sort out the mess and the confusion of the world. I certainly have experienced the most unthinkable miracles, not for myself, but for other people through the intercessions of St. John. So, as a representative, as an ambassador of Holy Russia, of all the saints, representing what's in all of them in that icon, we honour him on this weekend, and we constantly seek his intercession. And of course you hear that during this anniversary, this historical anniversary period for our church abroad, at the outpost of every liturgy, we ask God to have mercy upon us through the intercessions of St. John the Wonderworker. And we've been strengthened when we've heard the words of Vladika, his recollections, even if it's of the glorification, even if it's of the reclothing, those second-hand things that he's able to share with us when Vladika John's spiritual children have shared them with our Vladika. This gives us the most incredible link to holiness. Holiness not as something of the past and as something archaeological and historical, but as something which is alive and is alive today, because we know that holiness is rooted in the experience of God, who is without beginning and who is without end. So again, a very, very happy feast on account of St. John the Wonderworker, and a very happy feast on account of all the saints who've shone forth in the Russian land. And let's remind ourselves that this isn't about Russian saints. This is a feast about people of many nations who happened to have struggled and been glorified by their podvig in the Russian lands, plural. Great Russia, as it used to be referred to, Little Russia, Malorossiya, Ukraine, Belarus, and even poor Carpatho Russia, which has never existed as a nation. We celebrate the saints of all of these lands, and we will put the icon of St. John next to them as perhaps our most recent contact with this holiness. God bless you all. Happy feast, Praznikom.